Yes, welcome everyone. There's 14 attendees, so that's a good one. I think we can start. So thank you so much everyone for taking time out of your day to attend this webinar. I'll start off by giving apologies from Tamara. She sends us most sincere apologies because she got held up at the airport. She was trying to fly back to Sydney, and unfortunately, due to flight delays, she was unable to make it here on time. So she's still in transit, but she asked me to facilitate. This is my first time to facilitate. I'll try and do the best I can. But in the meantime, have yourself a glass of water, and we'll have our fabulous panel take us through some of their presentations. I will head straight into it by getting an acknowledgement of country from Delta. Delta, if you could kindly give us an acknowledgement, that would be awesome.
Good evening, everyone attending tonight's Let's Talk Regenerative Tourism, which is really important for our future across the east coast of Australia. We all meeting across the New South Wales coastline. Where I'm sitting is the Arakwal people. We are the Arakwal people, the Byron Bay Shire, and we belong to the Greater Bundjalung Nation. Jingiwala, Lagamia Rakudugun, Jandamani Nyali Garamanyali, Nyali Nya Nyathan Nyathan Jen, Garamanyali, Wana Jangma Malakanu, Ugube Arakudugun. Just calling out to my ancestors, just letting them know that we're here on country, talking up country, and we're being talking in the most respectful way. I acknowledge all Aboriginal nations across the lands that we all gathered on, and my respects and blessings to Aboriginal people who may be present on tonight's panel. Gube, thank you.
So thank you very much, Delta, for that beautiful acknowledgement of country. So just very briefly, I'll do some housekeeping before we get into introducing our panel. The way we'll run this is we will spotlight each panelist as they take us through what their presentation is. And then at the very end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So again, the way that we'll operate is I ask that all attendees raise their hands. There are 3 cogs at the end of their screen where you can raise. If you click on those, you'll see a raise hand, and I'll have a running list of everybody that has put their hand up, and then we'll go through them. And please, when you do ask your question, make sure you mention whom the question goes to, and and tell us your name pretty much. All right, so on today's panel, we have the lovely Diane Dredge. I'm trying to spotlight Diane. Sorry. We have Diane Dredge, who is, Diane is she's a policy expert in regenerative tourism. She does a lot about visitor economy. She's got years and years of experience. Those of you who have access, you can look up our website. I think it's called Tourism Collab. Diane will be taking us through some of the pros and cons, well, mostly the pros of regenerative tourism. And she'll also be telling us about how regenerative tourism can benefit our economies. We also have Delta K as a second panelist. I might just try and highlight Delta. I'll remove the spotlight from this. So that's Delta. So Delta is an Aboriginal elder from Byron Shire Council, or from Byron Bay, also known as the Arakwal Nation. Is that right? Delta
Arakwal
does
people.
Arakwal people, yeah. So Delta does tours.
People? Arakwal people.
From the Arakwal people in Byron Bay, is that right?
Yes.
So Delta does some cultural tours within the local area. So any of you who ever get a chance to go to Byron Bay, feel free to organize a really insightful tour with her. She educates people about culture, connection to country, and cultural practices of the Aboriginal people in the past. And also she explores a little bit about the First Nations tourism and Aboriginal culture as a whole. So Delta will be talking to us about that as well. And then our final panelist today is Shanae Francis. So Shanae is currently doing her postgraduate degree in tourism. She'll be talking about issues with status quo and a shift to more localized tourism. Shanae again has vast experience in community tourism, I think in Newcastle. So she'll be exploring the kind of different approaches she takes when she undertakes tourism in her local area. So that's our panel. Welcome, everyone. We are so looking forward to hearing from all of you. And we hope that this evening is as informative for everyone as it has been for me while I was preparing all this. So thank you. We will start off with Diane, who will take us through regenerative tourism, an overview. Okay.
Awesome, thank you, Jackie. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past and present, and to thank you, Delta, for that really lovely acknowledgement. Was, yeah, really lovely. So thank you for that. I'm coming today from the Yagara and Turrbal country, and I would like to talk about regenerative tourism, and I guess how I've come into this space. And my understanding is that most of tonight we will actually be devoting to question and answer, so I'll make my presentation quite short. And there is a lot of information on the tourismcolab.com.au, which is the website for the Tourism Collab. So I guess what I would like to do is just to take you to a place of reflection to begin with, to connect with what we know and what we think about the future of tourism, and to really connect with our hearts, our heads, and our guts. To really think about the future of this planet, and to really think about how tourism might fit into that picture. I did this a couple of years ago when I left academia, and I finally had a moment to slow down, and coming back from overseas to connect with, to come home again. And in that process, I really took a moment to really take a big, deep breath, and to really connect with what I was thinking about the future of tourism in my head, my heart, and my gut. There's a very new and emerging field called neuroscience that is telling us that there is intelligence in that felt experience. And ironically, we're only just catching us up with what Indigenous people have known for a very long time, and I'm sure that Delta will be talking about this. So for me, it was a need to actually reconnect with where we were going in tourism, and to really reframe and to reset our mindset, because we know that this planet cannot continue on this this trajectory of growth and the prioritization of profit, and the use of our natural resources, our community resources, our social resources. So the idea of regenerative tourism, it has actually been around for quite a long time, for the last couple of decades in the scientific literature, and much longer in sort of Indigenous areas. But I think it's really important that over the last few years, it started to come into the tourism space. It's not into, it hasn't been acknowledged very much, and it hasn't really been explored in a policy sense. We're still experimenting with it, and we're still really trying to figure out what it means. So what is it? Regenerative tourism is it's a mindset shift. First and foremost, it's a mindset shift. It's not a segment. It's not a fashionable word. It's not something that you can stick under or in front of sustainable to make it sound more powerful. So I've heard a lot of, regenerative and sustainable tourism. It's not a fashionable term. It actually is a mindset shift in the way that we think. And it's a relational shift in the way that we think about our relationship to the planet, to each other, to ourselves, and to nature. So it's definitely not just another bolt-on, add-on term to try and pivot and collect a different competitive advantage. It actually requires that we stop, we think, and we connect our heads, our hearts, and our guts. So for me, regenerative tourism and the way that we've been working in the collab is to really define regenerative tourism in terms of regenerative tourism seeks to ensure visitors' experiences, travel and tourism deliver a net positive benefit to people, places and nature, and that it supports the long-term renewal, the flourishing and the regeneration of our social and our ecological relationships. So that is a very sort of technical definition, I suppose. But what I'd like to share with you is just very briefly, let me just see if I can, hang on, share there. Hang on, I've just lost, sorry about that. I've just lost the Zoom. Okay, I can't find where the Zoom is. Sorry about that. Here it is. No. I should have.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I've got two screens here, and it's obviously just decided to no, I can't do it. It's completely disappeared. No, I can't. Anyway, I will just go on with it. I'm sorry, I can't show you, but I will be able to potentially show you the slide. It was really just one slide. And what I wanted to do was share with you the 10 dimensions of what regenerative tourism means within the context of the way that I work. So the first one is we need to actually be able to do inner work, to actually connect with our heads, our hearts and our guts, and to really sort of connect with what our values and our vision for the future are. The second dimension is that we really need to learn how to have good conversations, generative, constructive conversations, something that we're not particularly good at. We've been bowling alone for too long, and we need to really learn how to communicate and to deep listen, to build empathy and to connect more genuinely with nature, with other people, with our communities. We need to include nature is the third dimension, including nature and taking nature into decision making so that we can indeed prioritise the regeneration of nature in the decisions that we make about tourism. It's also about number 4, systems change. We actually need to acknowledge that tourism doesn't happen in a silo and that there are lots of unintended consequences when you focus just on tourism growth and profit. There are lots of other unintended consequences because what you're doing is you're commodifying nature and communities. And as a result, they tend to be suffer a lot of impacts from being exploited. The fifth is about integrated intelligence, and that is about really connecting with head, hearts and guts, but also acknowledging that we need diverse perspectives. We need people who think differently. In the past, we've only really had people that think and use sort of technical skills and technical knowledge and scientific knowledge. we actually need to integrate other kinds of intelligence and knowledge and really try to make our decisions in a much more inclusive way. Number 6 is actually about connecting with this, or acknowledging the deep sense of community, deep sense of place and connection to place that we have, and to try and acknowledge that places are different. There is no pro forma, there's no template. Authentic, genuine tourism that regenerates those local places must connect with the true character and identity of those places. So it is about belonging and stewardship, really connecting with local communities to understand why they want to connect and why visitors want to connect, and how those places can be interpreted and a true connection developed, and that stewardship can be nurtured. Number 8 is about co-creating value. So recognising that it's not just about profit and growth businesses, but we can actually have social businesses, not-for-profits, and other kind of business structures, other kinds of exchange, where the value that is created and exchanged actually regenerates the local communities and with nature. Number 9 is all about the learning journey. We forget sometimes that we always need to reflect and to learn and to build that into the process that about how we're making decisions and how we're dealing with tourism. So that learning journey is really important. That's number 9. And finally, the 10th pillar is all around participation and inclusion. So we've really been dealt a difficult time, particularly recently, with the idea that social inclusion and in fact social license has been overlooked in terms of tourism. So actually making sure that both the social license and environmental license is part of the process of the decision making in the way that we plan and manage tourism in the future. So for me, I guess what's really important in the 10 sector sort of diagram that I use for regenerative tourism is that we're really trying to design out the idea that tourism is extractive. We're designing in the notion that it should be regenerative. We also know that the current tools and approaches that we've used in the past have not worked. Sustainable tourism, it might have helped, but it actually comes from a very scientific mindset. And so, you know, it breaks everything up into all the problems into nice little colourful tiles, and everybody goes away and works on whatever sustainable development goal speaks to them. But in the process, there's a lot of integrated knowledge and unintended consequences that fall through the cracks there. So our current tools and approaches haven't worked. And finally, I just want to kind of leave you with this idea that even though we're talking about regenerative tourism, we need to sort of centre this back on the notion that we have always travelled and we always will. We need to reframe tourism in a way that we can actually stay within our planetary boundaries, that we can actually acknowledge social and environmental licence, and try to attract the right kind of visitors who want to connect and give back. We want to offer generative and genuine visitor experiences. And we also want to put nature and community at the centre of our decision making. In the past, we've really just put the consumer at the front, and that's been a very extractive and detrimental way that we've approached it. So in the end, what we're really trying to do is generate positive impact, so that positive impact can be invested back into the community. So that's pretty much the way that we think about regenerative tourism, and practicing that through our application in various destinations. So thank you for that, and I'll pass it back to you, Jackie.
All right, thank you so much, Diane. That was so insightful. If you have any questions, please take note of them. We'll be coming back to you at the end of our presentations. Thank you to all those that have just joined us. If you could keep telling us which country you're from in the chat room, that would be awesome. We'd love that. We want to know how far we've reached. So thank you so much. We will now move on to Delta. to tell us more about Aboriginal cultural tourism and how well we can practice that using regenerative tourism, so to say.
Hi, Jingi Walla everyone, and I'm watching the chat and loving everyone coming from their traditional homelands. What a beautiful way to connect to Aboriginal culture through acknowledging our First Peoples. Thank you, Diane. You just led me into this, tourism. This is a vision from my elders. We want to see country how it used to be. We want to continue to look after country, and we want it to look after us. We want our people to be back on country, caring and using country like we always have. We want to share parts of our culture with the wider community so they learn about respect country like we do. We want everybody to work together to keep country clean and healthy. That is a vision for Arakwal National Park for my mum and her sisters. And my nan and grandfather had 13 children, and the last surviving of the 13 children were women. And the women saw Eddie Mabo receive his native title, and they thought, oh, if he can do it, we can do it too. So they set upon that path of native title. What an ugly white man's business. For me, as a young Arakwal woman, supporting my elders go through that journey was difficult to hold them and to keep their spirits strong when they were, given such horrible treatment, yet such beautiful treatment along that journey. And I'm reading from their plan of management. And I just want to talk about this because the Arakwal National Park plan of management was first of its kind for my elders. They turned their backyard into what is now called Arakwal National Park. And they made sure when they worked with our joint management committee in national parks that our management committee plan was going to be written in plain English so our people could pick up this important, well, I call it a Bible, because our kids can pick this up, and in this plan of management are all these visions and quotes from our old people about creating Arakwal National Park. And why is that important? Well, for me as an Arakwal person who spent many years working in national parks as an education officer, and as our elders slowly passed away, they pushed us in that position where we continued that vision of Arakwal National Park. Today, I run my own Aboriginal cultural business called Explore Byron Bay Aboriginal Tours. And after working for many years for, national parks, after many years of wearing that hat of chairperson in our national parks, which I thoroughly enjoyed, using my elders' knowledge and marrying that with the science of national parks has been a real win-win for our people and the Byron Bay community. We have not only protected country through the elders' vision and native title journey, but along the way, the elders won these incredible awards. So 2001, they turned their backyard, their campsite, their hunting ground into what we called Arakwal National Park in Byron Bay. 2 years later, Sydney National Parks Office saw the incredible work that the elders were doing of national parks. So they nominated them for a World Environmental Award to the IUCN, International Conservation Union of Nature. This is a global award that looks around the world of what people are doing with protecting country. And when Arakwal National Park and the Cape Byron Trust was in the spotlight, my sister, my auntie Lorna, flew over to South Africa for this nomination. And on the same stage as Nelson Mandela, my family picked up the Fred Packard Award, creating Arakwal National Park. And this award isn't just for Byron Bay. It's not for my people. It is for our community. It is for Australia. This is what happens when you allow the first people to be empowered, be self-determined, to speak and manage their own country. So Mum and her sisters, they wanted to protect our sacred sites, and they wanted to be self-determined, to employ our people to look after our lands. So since that happened, I've had this incredible journey with my old people to just sit back and learn from them. We're in 2022. Since the start of our native title, and they won the Fred Packard Award in 2003. Along the way, we've done lots of incredible smaller awards, and then another ICUN, International Conservation Union Award in Sydney around about 2016, where we won the inaugural Green List. And as chairperson, I got to go to Sydney and pick up this incredible award with my family. Now, these awards from my heart, from my gut, Diane, I want to tell the world how incredible that these 4 elders, against all the odds, worked with the New South Wales government to protect country. That's all they wanted to do. And today, in 2022, those 4 sisters have passed away. And my mother and her sisters have just ingrained that into my heart and my soul. So in 2020, I stepped away from national parks. I wanted to just work on country, want to work outside. So I created what is called Explore Byron Bay Aboriginal Tours. The forefront principles of those tours are exactly what I just read out for you. I want to tell the story of my incredible elders. I want to welcome people here warmly. I want to share our story, and I want to welcome them here with those protocols and those traditions and those customs that when you come to Arakwal country in the Byron Shire, we welcome you. We will protect you like family, but we expect good behaviour from you when you're here on country. Because as a young child, I've just watched people come here to this beautiful shire and just disrespect and tread all over country. And now it's got to stop. Our planet is in trouble, and we need to learn the Aboriginal ways of being, looking, listening, thinking and knowing. Bundjalung country, we call that Gunga. Have a go, Gunga. Our deep listening You hear that term Didiri? Well, it's our Ganga. And enough's enough. Stop trashing our sacred sites. Stop telling our stories. We will tell our stories. And no more cultural appropriation. If you want to use our knowledge, then you work with us. You employ us. We know our country. We know our history. Our country, our history is yours too. We want you to embrace it, but let us tell it. Because enough is enough. Our laws, our culture, our ceremony. We're having a huge revival at the moment. And you are responsible for supporting that. We want you to support us, but we also want you to let us tell our story, our history. And as an Aboriginal woman, hearing all my oral stories and the teachings from my old people, rape, the murder, the genocide, the land dispossession, my old people being stolen. We want to be the ones who lead our culture, but we need you beside us to do that. We want to be Aboriginal business owners in the tourism industries, and we need you to support us. Our Indigenous cultural intellectual property is under attack by people just trashing our knowledge. And we need this to stop. And as a woman who runs Explore Byron Bay Tours, I want to support other tour operators, and I really want to ensure that Aboriginal tourism is there, you know, strong in the future. But we can't do that unless we have local, state, and federal support behind us. So I really appreciate being able to speak tonight and be a part of this conversation for a strong tourism future. So thank you, Jackie, for inviting me, and thank you, Diane and Sinead, for being a part of this panel. Boogle thank you.
Thank you so much, Delta. I think we can all agree that no matter which way you look at it, the only way forward is to actually think about country and think, listen, and actually act based on what you've listened to and what you've seen. It's not just a matter of making income. So thank you so much, Delta. That's been very, very informative. I'm mindful of time. I don't want to cut off our time for questions. So I'll very quickly run to Sinead, and then we will get straight into the questions. So Sinead, it's your show. I'll just spotlight you here.
Thank you. And I was wondering, Jackie, would you mind sharing the slideshow?
Absolutely not. All right. So which one is it? There you go. And
right, well, I'll say hi everyone. I'm Sinead from Newcastle Greens. I'm here on Orbital Country in Wollabimba.
Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah, yeah, I can. And so I pay my respects to the Wabiko elders, past, present, or future, and to any Indigenous people joining this discussion today. So I'm going to try and do a bit of a broad discussion of where tourism's at the moment. And I guess to start off, I'll talk about some of the issues, why the work that Diane and Delta are doing is so important. So if we can go to the next slide, that would be amazing. Okay, so I mean, you will be getting the sense already that tourism, as it's structured globally, it exploits people on the planet, just plain and simply. A really big factor in that has been fast tourism, so people traveling more often for shorter periods of time, which really does put extra stress on resources. And also culturally, like, it shouldn't be that hard for people to tell their stories. So there's a really big element of neo-colonialism there, where the power is centred in rich Western countries, essentially. A lot of these problems also stem from viewing tourism as a commodity, something to be sold, rather than an experience and all the other benefits that come from tourism, like self-actualization and being able to, develop, as Diane was talking about, net positive to a community. Of course, there are access issues, whether that's physical access, social, cultural access. That's a real thing to participation in tourism. I think the broader understanding of tourism is still quite limited, whereas the academic field understands things like broken leisure, which could be enjoying sunshine in a park in your lunch break, that or a new direction to walk. But also the travelling of global families is more and more, and so all of this has an element of tourism. So I think we need to understand it more broadly. If we can move to the next slide. So I know there's been questions about this too, so this might answer that. So part of the reducing the impact of tourism or working towards this regenerative model is also looking locally for our tourism. So this can look like local walking tours. I've enjoyed a couple of different tours here in Newcastle like that, and let me tell you, there are definitely many ways, or unlimited ways, you can see their own place that you're used to living. Cultural events or experiences. So First Nations, of course, really important, whether that's like a tour or a basket weaving class, which I know they have here, but all other sorts of things, art exhibitions, festivals, markets, all of that form part of local tourism and things that you could do. And of course, a newer element to this is virtual reality. So that also can bring things to you in your own home that, is another way of reducing impact where that's appropriate. It's a, I guess, fast developing space as well, which some of you may have come across. If we could move to the next one. And I've noted here some examples of what this actually looks like in real life. So one of my favorites is Spoonville, and I don't know if you can see the pictures there, but what happened during the pandemic is all these little villages cropped up of wooden spoon people, where local kids and families would make people and put them there. But the trick is you'd go back a couple of days later or a week later to see the other people who've joined the village. So it's just like an unleashing of creativity, and that's part of that self-actualization and educational purposes. And another example I saw was the window walk. So Derby Street in Newcastle, the shops weren't open for business during lockdowns, but they will put up little window displays that had little puzzles or messages for people, and you could walk along the street and see what they had up in their windows. So that was sort of another way of building community. But also some of the, I guess, less left of centre things, bushwalking, cycling, gardening, that's all touristic experience in lots of cases. And craft, things that people did, like taking time to, I've learned in the last week how much time making sourdough takes. So that's something people did as well. And I also noticed during the pandemic, lots of prominent museums around the world opened up their exhibitions and works virtually, did virtual tours. So again, that's another great way that makes tourism more accessible to people. Anyone who has the internet can do that. You don't need to have the price of a ticket, and it reduces the impact too. So another thing, you might not have thought of mutual aid as tourism, but what happened during the pandemic is people wanted to help and do something. And so like these, you might have seen the kindness forums that kind of crept up, but it actually meant people, doing things that they hadn't done in their local communities before. And all of that, again, has a bit of a touristic experience. So I would consider that. And another of my favourites is the citizen science that seems to just be growing in popularity. So events like the Great Aussie Bird Count or Frog ID Week that actually encourage people to get out and reconnect with the country that they're on, listen and, to what you can hear, look for what you can see, and join a community of people reporting back on that. So all of that is already happening. I think people don't always realize what they're doing is tourism. So that's partly also about expanding our understanding. And if we could go to the next slide, that would be wonderful. Okay, this is the last one. So what does this mean for us as Greens? Well, currently, I think I like what's in our New South Wales Greens policy currently, but I think it's very much focused on, there's a lot about planning in there. And I think that's the thing, people, generally the understanding of tourism is more as the bricks and mortar, like the actual museum or the tour bus, whereas, you know, those of us in the academic side of things look at the experience and all those other aspects of it as well. So I think, you know, that's I would like to see a broader definition as a starting point. But I think it also, it's kind of working within the status quo, what we have, and I'd really like to see us try and shift that towards the stuff that Diane and Delta have been talking about. So, I mean, one of the ways we do that is also recognising tourism as a social force. So for truth-telling and for, you know, educating about ecology or whatever else. And people, I mean, why not take people to an open cut mine site and explain how the rehabilitation works? I'd go on that tour. So, you know, I think there's so much scope for that sort of thing. But also, it's advocating for more grassroots models. So Destination New South Wales over time sort of drew back lots of resources from the regional tourism organisations, and kind of, you know, they generally have a Sydney-centric kind of approach anyway, but that took out some of those local voices that can then, you know, appeal to their local communities about what there is to do locally. So a lot of weight has fallen on the councils to run their local tourism, but they're not properly resourced for that necessarily. So we need to kind of look at that. And I think co-management models, like working with people like Delta and other First Nations organisations in that, but I do is a really important place to start too. But I also see potential in sister cities. So the first time I went overseas was like a school visit, and we were hosted in people's homes, and we got like direct access to the community, but it also meant that there was an exchange of goodwill, of learning, and I learned more Japanese than I did in all my classes being in that household. So that was organised through sister cities, and there's that cultural mediation that means that you're just going to have a better understanding of where you're going and you know where you are, and not upset people. Exploring the links between tourism and conservation. So lots of people going up to help in Lismore, for example, right now. That's kind of what that looks like, unfortunately, and you know, hopefully in some more positive circumstances as well. But that, in some cases, that is a touristic experience for people going to, you know, to see that and to help and to be part of it. Tourism's not always pretty, but you know, it's about that self-actualization and educational experience too, and the net positive for the community. Prioritise local tourism offerings, so we can look at promoting structures that do that, and addressing some of the barriers to tourism. So I think we do that by collaborating with diverse communities. And the last point that I want to make is, you know, in tourism marketing, you've typically probably heard the word escape. Well, I think what the focus needs to be is shifting the emphasis to, like, let's build a quality of life for people, you know, where we are, so that you don't feel like you need to escape to somebody else's island and, you know, spend lots of money doing it. So that's sort of, yeah, a bit of a degrowth approach, and yeah, happy to keep that discussion going.
Right. Thank you so much, Sinead. Right, so we only have at least 15 minutes for questions, and the way I'm going to do this is I will, if you raise your hand, any one of the attendees, I'll put together lists. I don't think we'll have time for more than 5 questions, but if the panelists keep it to 2 minutes answering each question, then we might be able to do more questions. So I will take questions for whoever puts up their hand first, and we'll keep going that way. So whose hand is up? Okay, all right, just give me a second, trying to work out whose hand's up. My apologies, I can't. All right, so Daniel has his hand up. Daniel, what's your question, and who? Please tell us where you're from, what your question is, and whom it's addressed to.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm from sorry. I'm from the. I'm not actually in my home tonight, so excuse me.
Sorry, Daniel.
But yeah. So my question was, as part of regenerative tourism, one idea of moving towards environmental sustainability is that of reducing international tourism and increasing domestic tourism, because that would reduce the amount of flights taken across large bodies of oceans, which, you know, that is a huge amount of carbon emissions right there. Is that a part of a regenerative tourism approach? And if it is, what are the implications for policy around flights?
All right, I think, Dan, that's for you. You're mute, Dan.
Sorry, what?
No, Daniel. Dan's.
Yeah, I just needed to unmute. Sorry about that. Yes, so this is actually a really core part of the transition we need to make. Obviously, I mean, if we are going to regenerate people, place and planet and to address climate change, currently long-haul travel or tourism prior to COVID was responsible for between about 10 and 13% of GHG. So it's really important that we reduce particularly long-haul travel, which essentially means that we need to rethink and reframe what tourism is. So I like to think about tourism as being that industrial mindset from the 20th century. And the question that I put to people is, well, if tourism doesn't exist and we will always travel, what does travel look like? What does this human desire to explore, connect, and to learn, what does that look like? So that's the question. And I think it's something for every destination and every community to consider. And to me, regenerative tourism means what Delta was talking about, digging deep, connecting, learning, growing, and transcending into another mindset where we're connected and we're caring.
Thank you so much, Dan. I hope that's been answered. Daniel, any other questions? Yes, we have a question from Gary. Gary, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello. Thanks. I don't know if I've got my camera on, sorry.
That's
yeah,
all right.
thanks for the presentation so far. It's just been awesome. I worked at the Alice Springs Desert Park for a number of years, and the Alice Springs Desert Park was all about tourism. We were all about attracting people to Alice Springs, and it used to often burn me up about when considering the amount of carbon that people were producing in getting there. But I used to, I guess, rationalise that by ensuring that we kept people there as long as we could, and so many of our visitors, all of our visitors, engaged with Murukatwi, our traditional custodians, Aranda custodians in Alice Springs, and what we would strive to do with our custodians, with the stewards of land, was to bring about some behavioural change. So I worked in the Northern Territory Government, we're a government agency, but in spite of that, I would the number of unsolicited letters I would get from people having returned home to the East Coast often, sometimes the West Coast of Australia, and say, my journey was appreciably changed as a consequence of my conversation that I had with Doug or Leroy or whoever it might have been. I went intending to climb Uluru with my family, and we chose not to because of the conversation I had with Leroy. And so I'm therefore torn, trying to understand how we can minimise our carbon cost and yet still put people in the same places, say Doug and Leroy, to bring about some of those cultural and behavioural changes that Delta spoke of earlier. It's a quandary.
Delta, do you want to take that, or do you want to respond to that?
So what was the question about? Like, yeah.
There was no real question other than it was difficult for me to reconcile bringing people to Alice Springs and the carbon cost with that, but knowing that the work that we did through our traditional custodians was so valuable and so important. I didn't know how to do both. I didn't know how to do one without the other. It was complex, that was all. How do I get people to Central Australia without them travelling?
Yeah. Look, Gary, I think what the question you're probably, or what the point you're raising is kind of what's on everyone's most, it's kind of the challenge that everyone kind of has in the tourism industry. But I think Sinead gave some options on that one, things such as virtual tourism, encouraging those kinds of options. Sinead, did you have anything else to mention on that?
Yeah, like there's not just First Nations culture in Arnhem Land or in the centre of the country. There's First Nations culture right here where you are, and that's first and foremost where we start. Like if you're not connected with the First Nations people where you are, then that's the first place to start. Do the tours. Tourism Australia has recognised just what and I don't like looking at it this way necessarily, but a growth industry, the increasing popularity of Indigenous tourism options. So that's the thing. We used to think we have to go that far to have, to experience genuine First Nation culture or interaction. But, it's that whole regenerative idea is being part of that in your own local community and boosting that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sinead. We do have two other questions, and I think this is pretty much all the time we might have for today. One is from Daniel, and he says, can a strategy of reducing international tourism and increasing domestic tourism be a component of regenerative tourism? To me, that would be a key step towards environmental sustainability. So I think Daniel's just, Daniel, would you like to clarify whether that's a question or just a point to note?
That was a question I've already asked.
Okay.
So it's been answered. Yeah.
All right, perfect. And then the other one that Daniel asked is as an auxiliary question. What does this mean for policy around flights? I think, again, similar to what everyone has talked about.
Yes.
Dan, did you have any final comments or any final words before?
To raise a kind of question to ponder. And that's the tourism industry over the last, research that I've done shows that the tourism industry is really quite heavily subsidised. And in my state, there's on average a rescue package somewhere for the state every 2 years, whether it's, for whatever reason, not just pandemics and that sort of thing. It could be airlines or whatever. So in fact, policy has actually held up this kind of form of tourism, which is dependent on flights and is, it's quite heavy in terms of its use of natural resources. The other thing is about that policy is that most of that money actually goes to large companies, not medium, small, micro or Indigenous companies. So we actually really need to think about our priorities, about where we're spending our money and what we want to prop up. And whether we want to continue with this crisis policy response. Anyway, just a quick,
Thank you. So we are only left with 6 minutes. I will point out, so I can see that Lisa is here with us. Lisa, early in the week, had posed a question about ethical tourism in relation to animals. Lisa, would you like to ask that question now, or I'll just turn you. Lisa, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Hello, Lisa.
My question for any of the panel members, perhaps Diane would be best to answer this, is the increasing concern about animals in tourism, and just to hear your comments on how regenerative tourism includes concerns about animal welfare along the same lines as habitat destruction and nature.
Thanks, Lisa, for the question. And regenerative tourism is a very emerging approach. I think now I've given you in the chat function where the framework is that I use with the 10 pillars to it. The third one is about listening to nature and asking who can speak for nature and how do we take nature into our conversations. And I mean all kinds of, you know, nature is just that very broad term, but it could be wildlife, it could be, you know, the sentient aspects of forests and trees and that sort of thing. So I take a very broad look at that. But I think actually sort of getting the voice of who can actually speak for nature is really important here. Remembering that regenerative tourism is ground up. So this is very context specific, it's not top down. So answering those questions and responding to that framework from the ground up is really important. So it would depend, who do you get in that community to respond on behalf of wildlife, for example, making sure that they're at the table.
Thank you so much.
And again, that means that, you know, you're working with your local Aboriginal communities, because these animals are usually our totems. And it's our inherent duty to look after our totems. So we must have a say in looking after our wildlife.
Thank you. So I'll take it that those are our final words. Sinead, do you have any final words as well before we wrap this up?
Just like you know, as someone who flies and who has flown a lot, I definitely wanted to just quickly touch on that again. I get these ethical dilemmas and they're not going to disappear quickly. But I think what it's all about is setting the model, you know, showing, like, looking ahead to where it is you want to be. And if we support and incentivize these local options, people will know they're there, they will be visible, and they will take them up. And so naturally we will see less people going overseas. If we address these general well-being and quality of life issues, we'll see less of the other kind of more intensive and exploitative forms of travel.
Thank you very much. I think with that, we kind of come to the end of this presentation. I just realized that I actually didn't introduce myself. My name is Jacqueline Alinaitwe, and I work with Tamara Smith. I'm her Senior Electorate Officer. I would love us to continue this conversation. And because of that, I'll be sending out some more information. And I think the panelists, if they have any links or any additional info they would like to provide the attendees here with, I would love to share that as well. Cheryl says, having recently researched sustainable tourism, issue of profit working within the planetary norms. Yes, totally agree on that one. And Daniel finishes off by saying, I think tax should be part of the solution too. Absolutely. Any ideas that you have, please send them to us. I'll share them with the panel. And I do hope that wherever you go, you start slowly in your small way practicing the regenerative tourism practices that we've discussed here today. So start small, start where you are. Start by listening, start by connecting, and then encourage others to do the same. So thank you so much and have a very lovely evening.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jackie.
You're welcome. Thank you.